I'm here with Brian Beckstead from Altra Shoes. Brian is the co-founder of the company. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Yes,
Good to catch up with old friends.
I know. So I guess it would be appropriate to start this off by saying how we know each other. Um, I started running ultras 15 or so years ago, and I was always a shoe geek. And I'd been writing a shoe blog as well as getting into trying to figure out the mechanics of how to run better. Probably started with a raging case of plantar fasciitis, which most people get when they start to run. And I had run across a little company almost making handmade shoes at that time. The first mass-produced shoe didn't even exist yet. You had those very, very, very minimal shoes. And there was this whole minimal movement going on with going thinner and thinner in the soles. And I had been into that a little bit, but those shoes hurt. And what I wanted was, I wanted a minimal shoe that had some cushioning, and I ran across this little company named Altra. And I reached out to you, and we got to know each other a little bit, and you sent me some demo shoes, and we started from there. That was, from what I saw, it was at least 10 years ago. So when was the start of Altra? Or I want to get all kinds of into the history, but...
Well, sure, but yeah, that would have been 2011. So that was 9 years ago. 9.5 maybe. We launched in April of 2011 was the first, when we actually had shoes, and then we only had a small production run that first run because we just didn't have the funding yet, and we only had a couple thousand pairs of shoes, and then the big launch for us was in August of 2011. That's when we had a larger amount of inventory and was really able to start shipping, larger quantities out to people. And I don't know where you fit in on that. I can't quite remember, but it would have been 2011.
It was right then, because I remember you telling me that, yes, you can get me some shoes, but they're not made yet. And you're in the middle of the first production run and it's really limited and you're going to do your best. And you got me 2 pairs of those, the silver shoes, the original ones.
Yep. The original Instinct.
The Instinct. That's right. I still have those shoes and I still wear them all the time. They're so comfortable.
Yeah, that first run was amazing. They were so durable, and the quality was great. I loved that those first couple of years. We had some really cool models.
Yeah, I got to tell you an interesting story about that shoe. I ran Western States in that shoe, and for anyone listening who's not familiar with Western States, the Western States 100 is the oldest, pretty much the oldest 100-miler known. It's an interesting story about how it happened. But it's a classic. And if you're an ultra runner, that's the one race you really want to do if you want. It's like being at Wimbledon. It's just the classic. And the first 10 or 15 miles of that race, it starts in the Sierra Nevada. And the first 10 or 15 miles usually consist of running over some ski trails. And depending on the weather and the snow year, depends on whether you're running across snow or slush or mud. And that particular year was ice. It was in the 30s at the start. And if you remember, those shoes had a very, very minimal tread. They were pretty much smooth on the bottom.
They were road shoes.
They were road shoes. And as at the start in the morning in the lodge, I can't remember what his position was, but the guy that I knew at New Balance was there, and he looked down at my feet and he said, "You're going to run in those?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, man, I'm going to run these." He goes, "Okay." And Western States does not allow you to use any traction devices. I thought I was going to die on this 1 mile stretch of ice, flat out ice with those road shoes. But they did great. And they were so unique in the market at that time for 2 reasons. One, 0 drop. They had no heel lift. Well, there were 3 things that were unique. It was a minimal shoe that had 0 drop, but it had cushioning. And it also had the most comfortable toe box I had ever used in a pair of shoes ever. They literally, for me, I was geeking out. They were the perfect shoe. fast forward 11 years now, Altra is a big brand with a lot of models. So, if you don't mind, kind of take me through the progression of how you and the other co-founder, Golden Harper, started this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back literally before we were born, right? Kind of the foundational story. You know, Golden grew up in a running family, and his dad was named Hawk Harper, and he blew his knee out playing college football back in the '70s, and was told, "Hey, you're going to walk with a limp. That's bone on bone. You know, your athletic career's over." And he just couldn't quite accept that, and someone ended up daring him to run a marathon. And so, if you know Hawk, if you dare him to do something, he'll probably do it, right? And so, um, he did it, and it was very painful, and stumbled in like 6 hours or something like that. And he kind of stuck with it, found it a real challenge, and started running more and more, and ended up becoming an elite marathoner. Like a 2:20 marathon guy.
Wow.
And so, that was when Golden was a baby by the time he got competitive. And so, Golden was raised in that environment in terms of running, because Hawk found that if you ran with good biomechanics, and if you ran a certain way, then his knee wouldn't hurt.
Mm.
And so, today we talk biomechanics, but in the late '70s and early '80s, that was not necessarily, that wasn't even talked about, right? I mean, biomechanics and running technique and all of that stuff was much later than that. But he kind of developed his own little system, and Golden was raised in that. Now, I was raised a bit as a runner too, not quite as competitive, but my sisters were very competitive. My dad ran 10Ks consistently, and couple half marathons and things like that. And so I ended up meeting Golden on the first day of high school at cross country practice. And we immediately hit it off as friends. And shortly thereafter, I started working at their running store, because Hawk, after several years of, a decade actually of this competitive running, and he was a shoe tester and an athlete for various brands, decided to start his own running store called Runner's Corner. And Runner's Corner was very unique in the fact that we sold lower profile, neutral shoes, and we watched every single person that bought a pair of shoes. We would watch them run, not the close-in pronation run, but full body biomechanics. We would do these running technique courses where we would videotape on the VHS, videotape people running, and then go and watch it on the screen. And this was in the '90s we were doing this. And so Golden and I were in high school in that time, right? And so, we just kind of bought into that, and Hawk would yell out biomechanical cues. Hey, drive those elbows back. Make sure you're leaning forward from the chest. All of these things that really nobody was talking about running technique or biomechanics, not in runner's world, not in any of these running magazines and so forth in the '90s. The shoe companies were all about stability and motion control. And so college came around in the 2000s, and we started elevating ourselves as a store. Golden and I started doing the managing, started doing the buying, where we were buying all these other brands, Mizuno, Saucony, Brooks, etc. And we started looking for science projects at school, and so we both ended up in degrees and fitness and wellness, exercise science, things like that. And so that was this is all kind of the germination of heading towards Altra. And as we got out of college, we were like, okay, we're continuing our career, and we both wanted to end up in the industry. And we started essentially petitioning the other brands to start making shoes that were wider in the toe box. And what we would do, and I don't have a shoe on me right now. Hold on, let me show you. We would lace our shoes differently. So we would skip these laces down here and go up wide. And we would fit every single person that come in the store. They said they were a size 8. We would pull out a size 9. We oversized everybody's shoes, and we wide laced them. And we were selling low profile, almost the performance trainers and racing flats regularly to people. And this was before minimalism, before Vibrant Five Fingers. And that was just the culture. We thought that the industry was over prescribing pronation and support. We were like, this is ridiculous. Just teach these people how to run. And we were really quite frustrated after years and years and years of this. And all of a sudden, Golden had this aha moment where he's like, why don't I just cut off the heel? and make it flat, because we would do laps on the grass barefoot as warm up and cool down and strides and all this stuff. And we had just found the Vibrant Five Fingers. We were the very first running store in the country to carry Vibrant Five Fingers. We were the first.
How did you? I'm interested in this because at the same time, I was inspired by what you were doing, and I was testing shoes for other people, and I started cutting the heels off those shoes. And it took me a hell of a while to figure out how to do it evenly, that I didn't wreck the shoes where I'm teeter-tottling back. How are you modifying the shoes?
So it started with a toaster oven. So Golden put his shoes in the toaster oven, heated it up. This was not new. Hawk was doing this all the time. Hawk used to drill holes in the midsole to make it lighter and more flexible back in the 80s. So like this was not something like new for us at Runner's Corner. Like we were always dinking and experimenting and relacing and doing this and doing that. And we'd get razor blades and cut like the outsole of the shoe to make more this was not unusual for us. But what Golden did is he put a shoe in the toaster oven, and the glue, once the glue gets hot enough, it kind of bubbles out. And he literally peeled off the upper and the outsole and the midsole and put in just a flat Spenco foam. So he actually changed the midsole of the shoe rather than hacking it off. Initially, that was the first big, when he coined the term zero drop. That was that point. We'd hacked and cut and done things like that, but that was that aha moment. And he called me up and it's like, dude, Brian, I just did something to my shoe, and all of a sudden my mechanics, I didn't have to fight against the shoe. The running technique came so easy and natural. And so I started doing it as well. And then what we found is, there's these, you can go out there, they're all over the place. There are these boot makers, these resolers that resole big hiking boots. And we went and talked to this guy that was right around the corner from Runner's Corner. And we found that they kind of brainstormed this idea of getting a bandsaw, like a legit bandsaw. Yeah. And we would bandsaw the shoe to the forefoot and then belt sand the heel down and then glue it back on, and then you'd caliper it. You could measure and caliper it. And so we started doing that to the shoes. And then here's what's really cool about this is obviously we started doing it for ourselves, right? We are runners. I at the time I was doing ultra marathoners. I was an ultra marathoner. I did my first ultra in 2005. So, and I was 23 years old at the time. So I was kind of a baby when,
not many people were doing ultras that young at that point.
No, there wasn't very many people doing ultras, period, let alone in their 20s. Most of it was like 45-year-old hippie dudes, right? I mean, hey, man, just saying. Hey, I'm talking about the Utah boys, but it was awesome. I loved it. And I was having some issues with my hamstring, and I would get these really bad blisters in all my longer races. And so I was looking and experimenting and trying new things. And so this really hit home to me, because all of a sudden I didn't have to, I wasn't overstriding as much. I was getting underneath my body. I wasn't having to fight against the shoe to run with good mechanics. Because I think if someone's running in good mechanics, they can overcome the issues in the shoe, right? But at the same time, you're having to really work against the shoe. And that's what we felt. And so when this was kind of this aha thing. And we started telling a couple friends, like, well, maybe you should try this. Well, all of a sudden it was weird, because word starts spreading that, oh, hey, there's this, you can get these zero drop shoes. And that's what we called it, right? Since we took out the drop, we coined that term, zero drop.
Just so everybody knows who's not into shoes, what you're referring to is the difference in the height of the heel versus your underneath your metatarsals, versus, the front of the shoe. And typically at that point, you're talking what, 15?
Every 12 to 15 millimeter drop. Yep.
Right. So
we're talking every shoe on the market was
which encourages heel striking, which is what you're referring to. It's not the total picture, but it is a big part of trying to fix your mechanics. Straight leg heel striking versus staying more forward centered over your body and landing more flat on your foot, right? And pulling. I mean, do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good connection there, right? Is that elevated heel not only does it weigh the shoe down, but from an engineering standpoint, it actually catches early. before you get underneath your body. Now, most people are going to naturally heel strike to a certain extent, but what we're really trying to do is get that foot strike. It's less for us. It's less about forefoot, midfoot heel strike. It's more about getting it underneath your center of gravity with a bent knee. And whether you're doing that with a slight heel strike or a forefoot strike or a midfoot strike, we don't really care about that as much, as long as it's underneath your body, underneath a bent knee where you can absorb that shock naturally. Where most people overstride, and then the shoe actually reinforces that overstride, which if you really think that air or gel or wave is going to absorb that amount of shock, it's kind of funny. I mean, you can do this in your own house right now. You can stand up off the chair, you can jump and land flat without bending your knees, and you can feel that, right? And then jump twice as high and bend the knees when you land, right? No amount of cushioning from any brand is going to make the difference between what your knees can do naturally. Gotcha. And you can experiment at that home. It's a really easy little experiment to do yourself. And so that's really what the shoes was about. Is, you know, this minimalist thing was still like kind of in the early stages. It hadn't gotten out publicly mainstream. And we felt that, okay, this minimalist thing's kind of cool, but really what we want is barefoot positioning. But in a modern world with these hard surfaces and things like that, we want a little bit of cushion. We kind of felt that there was the benefits of traditional footwear and the benefits of this minimalist thing.
And that was the same path I had went through.
Yeah.
I literally tried the minimal shoes and said, I love how these feel, but I feel like I'm going to break my heel. Even running correctly, it just was so abusive. There's nothing the matter with doing 3 or 4 miles, but when you're trying to do an ultra on real minimal shoes, it was just unnecessarily thrashing of your feet. And I was trying to find something that ran like a minimal shoe but didn't kill me.
Exactly.
And that's what you guys were creating.
That's what we created. And so this was back in kind of 2008 and 2009 when all that was happening. And the word got out, right? And we started telling, and here's what's really interesting about this, that I don't think people understand about ultra. People are like, oh, well, I'm just kind of an average runner. That zero drop, all that's for the hardcores. It's for the ultra marathoners. It's for these lightweight elite runners. And what people don't understand is, who did we tell this concept to? This weird, hey, let's go hack up your brand new shoes. We'll cut them up and all this. We didn't sell it to elites. We sold it to people who were desperate. We started doing it for people who had chronic injuries. I tried orthotics. I went to physical therapy. I've tried this. I am desperate. I'm hurting. And we were like, well, you could always try this little concept that we came up with. And all of a sudden, I don't want to sound like it's like snake oil or anything like that, but people were coming back to us and being like, my knee problem that I've been struggling with for 6 years is gone.
Yeah. And
they started preaching it to anybody and everybody. Hey, go to these guys. They'll hack up these shoes for you and it will fix your problem. We're like, okay, it's not going to fix all your problems, but it can help. And so we started getting these referrals. And next thing we know, we are having people knocking down the door about this concept. And locally, it became everything. And we were hacking up shoes. We hacked up in the first year. We hacked up and sold. We'd sell brand new pairs of shoes that we would send across the street to the shoemaker to hack up. And he would charge $20. So you'd get a brand new pair of shoes, pay $120 for a pair of shoes. Then you'd take it across the street for someone to hack it up and pay an additional $20. And we had 1,000 shoes. We did 1,000 pairs of those in the first year. And so GoldenEye, and I need to add in, and this is where the third founder, which doesn't get enough credit, Jeremy Howlett, kind of came in.
Yeah.
And Jeremy was like, well, why don't we start a shoe company on this? And GoldenEye were like, we were giving this idea for free to our sales reps. Hey, Saucony, Brooks, New Balance, here's what we're doing. We want a shoe that has a roomier toe box and has no heel. We call it zero drop. Would you make us this shoe? We just want you to build it. And they were, some of them were nice about it, and some of them were quite rude, actually. We got a couple brands that I've got grudges against, right? And they kind of laughed at us. You know, we were a couple cocky 20-something-year-olds, and they just weren't listening. And that's where Jeremy Howlett came along and said, well, why don't you guys start a shoe company? And all of a sudden, the brain starts going, and this was the summer of 2009. And all of a sudden, like, okay, well, let's reach out. What would it cost? And that, we started doing all this research, and within a couple months, it was like, oh, we could do this.
So,
And yeah,
sorry, I want to hear more,
no,
but I just,
please go. Whatever other details you want. Let's go for it.
I can't help but think this is the most basic lesson in creating a business that so many people miss is you were addressing a need that other people weren't listening, and you were ahead of the curve. Of course, look back at that now. I guarantee you every one of those, well, not everyone, but most of those shoe companies now is trying to make something to copy you, which has got to be, it's got to be poetic justice. It's got to feel awesome. But that's, you addressed I mean, you've got these people that are getting injured. Obviously, if you are seeing that, you're seeing that much of that out of one location, then and having that kind of success in helping people fix that, you've got to realize that this has got to be going on everywhere. And when people think outside of the box, usually the people in that industry, they don't get it. Otherwise, they would have already been producing it. And that's the crack in the wall that lets new businesses open up, and it's just, such a cool, so you are filling a need that the shoe companies weren't aware of yet, because you were on the ground working with the people who needed this fix, which I just think that's such a lesson when you're thinking about starting a new business or creating something. You didn't start a business to make money. You guys didn't say, hey, we sell shoes, we can have a shoe company and make a whole bunch of money. You said, there's a problem that nobody's fixing. There's some friction in the market. No one wants to fix it. Let's do it ourselves. So the money follows creating the value for the, for the end user.
Absolutely. Steve Jobs has a quote that I love, and he says, you have to start with the customer experience.
Yeah.
You can't start with an idea and then try to figure out how to sell it.
Yeah.
It's a hard way to go. Have that experience, the customer experience. They start with the ground up. They feel the need. They're the ones that tend to be successful. And I felt that I'm really proud of the fact that we found that, came up with it, and then ultimately that we pushed to put it into a company, because none of us had footwear design and development experience. None of us had a business degree. Jeremy had a little bit of experience there, but we just were really passionate about this, and we felt that nobody was listening to us, nobody was building it, and despite the fact that we gave them our ideas for our company for free, literally, we sat down with shoe designers at New Balance and Saucony and said, "Hey, build this shoe for us," and they now so again,
I hope you send them a Christmas card every year thanking them for not taking your idea.
No, we're pretty nice about it. But a couple of the sales reps that from back in the day that know us, they always say hi at the trade shows, and they're always like, "Dude, I remember when you guys were, trying to pitch us this idea." They're pretty cool about it within the industry. The shoe designers, I didn't know them well enough,
yeah.
But the sales reps are pretty cool about it. And it's definitely been a wild ride. And I'll tell you what, from really some of the hardest things that we had to deal with was not the concept. The concept to me was fun. That was that was so cool, developing that and whatnot. What's really hard is to then take that to market, right? And if you think about it, 2009 was not a really good year to get funding coming out of the recession there. And so we got so lucky for our first round of funding. We found someone who we had dealt with off and on in various arenas, that had made some pretty good money, and he kind of set aside a little money to explore and to just high risk, and we got him at the right time. And he was a friend of mine for a few years, and Golden had worked with him on some biomechanics, and he had a little extra money, and we got so lucky. And I'm really grateful for him to take that risk on us. It was we would not have been successful without that angel investor who came in and gave us a couple $100,000 to get it off the ground. And that's what it took. And that got us, the development costs, that got us a lot of the startup, the some of the tooling and some of the prototypes and the design work, which we did ourselves, but then we had to get someone to put our design onto CAD work, and working with the factory, and trips to China to develop. And that was hard. But that was fun. Those were such good years. We had the three of us were the primary, and then we had a lot of other people that so many. I mean, the three of us were the ones that started it and went with it, but we had so many other influences and help. And one thing that's really cool for me that as I look back on, and I think this is important for people to know and understand, is that my close circle of family and friends, not one of them told me I was stupid for starting a company. No one was like, Brian, what are you doing? Like this, you quit. I quit my job. I had a 6-month-old baby. I quit my job in winter of 2010. We had no income. We were living in my parents' basement with a child with no income. And I didn't have anybody pull me aside and be like, Brian, what are you doing? This is stupid. Everyone was like very supportive, which to me, as I look back on kind of like who I have chosen to work with and deal with and surround myself with, I think that was pretty cool looking back on some of my family and friends that were very, very supportive of us taking that risk and that chance and putting it all on the line. And we did. We put everything we sacrificed everything to make it happen. And when you have your back against the wall,
you don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice. You have to make it work. You have to make it work.
You're really, really fortunate that you did have that kind of support, because I don't think that's typical. Typically,
Agreed.
When you start a business, people that love you get scared. So because what you're doing is not in their comfort zone, and because they love you, they're worried for you. And you hear it from almost every entrepreneur or business owner that people said I was nuts, or whatever the case is. And obviously that can make the difference in your confidence to keep driving ahead. But the other situation, boy, does that resonate with me. I started my company with $500. We had about 2 months worth of money, 2 months worth of bills, money in the bank. I could pay the next 2 months. My wife stayed home with the kids.
Yep.
We had a mortgage. We had, a car payment. And when I started my company, I didn't have a choice. If it failed, I was going to lose my house. You know what I mean? And when you're under those kinds of circumstances, it's almost like what's needed. You have no time to contemplate not succeeding. You just have to find the next way to move forward.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. And kind of tagging onto that, what was pretty cool is we were getting desperate for funding, and our angel investor wasn't ready to put in more money, and so we needed $70,000, and we were like, we have to get this $70,000 to order the final prototypes. We were out of cash. We were desperate. We were knocking on doors and going to presentations and all that. And I finally was complaining about this to my dad, and I was like, do you know anybody? I mean, he's well connected. I'm the youngest of 9, and my dad's a professor. So it's not like we grew up with a bunch of money. Like, my dad's very frugal, and I was raised like that. I'm still very fiscally conservative in terms of, hey, I'm not going to get in debt. I'm not going to go crazy. Like, I'm pretty careful with that. And I was raised like that. And it was pretty crazy after having this conversation with my dad that a week later he came back and gave me a check. And he said, and I said, dude, Dad, I did not ask you for money. And he's like, I know. And he's like, but if you want, this is your inheritance. And if you never pay me back, that's fine. This is your inheritance. Here you go.
Did I read it was his retirement money, basically what he was?
No, he just pulled out a mortgage on his house.
That's big risk.
Yeah, I mean, he had money elsewhere and savings and stocks, but essentially with 9 kids, you divide all that. Yeah. He basically he told me, he's like, hey, look, this is your inheritance. If you don't pay me back, not the end of the world. And which was crazy that he was willing to do that. What's more crazy is that I was willing to do that too. I was like, yeah, totally. We need this money. And so we came in, and that money bought us. You ready for this? This is how much it costs when you talk about early prototypes from a non-established company. You have to prepay for it at the factory, et cetera, et cetera. That got us 6 pairs of shoes.
God. Wow.
When you talk tooling, you're talking every size, for tool is usually $5,000 to $6,000 just for the tooling, right, of one model in one size. And so that was when we tooled up 3 different models. We had the Instinct and Intuition, because we were female specific. We still are. We're gender specific in the way we build our shoes, which is unique still to this day, which is kind of sad. But we had the Adam and Eve, which is our minimalist shoe, and then we had the
Those are the
Lone
ones I
Peak.
remember. The Adam and Eve.
Yeah, and then we had the Lone Peak. And so we had those 3 models, and that paid for the prototypes. 1 pair of men, 1 pair of women in each of those models. And
I wanted those Lone
that was,
Peaks so bad. You posted those 6 months before I could get them, and I wanted those shoes so bad because they were the shoe that I had worn for Western States, but they had traction, they had grip.
yeah.
I wanted that shoe. And then you tell me, oh, dude, they're the best shoes. I just ran Wasatch and I didn't get any blisters. Yep. And I'm like, I want those shoes.
Yep, and those Lone Peaks are my baby. That I feel like the Lone Peak is my shoe. I do those 100-mile trail races, and I tested those. Those arrived, and 2 weeks later, after they arrived, I laced up the only pair of men's Lone Peaks that we had, and I laced them up for Wasatch 100, and said, "Okay, let's put these to the test." And I at mile 97, I had. I'm not a religious person, but I had a spiritual experience at mile 97 that just completely overpowered me with emotion and just knowledge. And I'd already sacrificed. I'd taken my inheritance. I'd quit my job. At that point, I had, a 10-month-old baby boy. We had no income. Debt was starting to really pile up. And I just had this lightning bolt of knowledge that Altra would be successful.
Giving me chills.
It was crazy. Like I can't explain it. Like, if you've had an experience like that, and I had it. It was unbelievable. And since then, even at that point, my confidence even expanded more. And my back was already against the wall. And I just had this, like, we're gonna make it. We 100%, no ifs, ands, or buts, knowledge. And we went to work, kept working, kept scrapping. And we got another round of funding. Our original angel investor said, "Okay, if you book amount of shoes, I'll place an order for those shoes." And he did, and that's where we launched in April. And then we got acquired for our big funding, which we were desperate in need of. That we said, "Look, we want this to go big, and so do we want a small slice of a big pie or a big slice of a small pie?" And we said, "We want to go big. We want to take this global." And that's when we sold to a company called Icon Health and Fitness. And they gave us all the funding we needed, and we started cranking. And we've been cranking ever since. The Lone Peak is, my kind of my baby, right? My shoe. It's the number one. It's our number one shoe. It's the number one selling trail shoe at Run Specialty in America. It's the number one selling trail shoe at REI. It's the number, the Lone Peak has been so big for us. Even though we started as a road company, our first shoe we launched was the Instinct, which is a road model. And so we balance now. We're kind of about 55% road, 45% trail in terms of our overall sales, even though we're a little bit better known for trail shoes. But we've got a whole slew of shoes now. We are found in 55 countries. It's been crazy.
It's the old story. Your overnight success took 15 years of really hard work. Now, didn't you when after you got inquired the first time, didn't you get in your vehicle and drive all over this country selling these to running stores all over the country? Because I know up here in New Hampshire, I had some friends at running stores that said, "I just met this guy from Altra Shoes. Have you heard of them?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've heard of them. You've got to carry these shoes." But you went all over this country, didn't you?
Yeah. So once we got that funding, once the shoe launched, I packed up my Subaru Outback with my coolie box on the top. I filled it with like a little booth, a couple little pull-up banners and whatnot. It's every shoe I could fit in the back of my car. And I basically just hit the road and started knocking on doors. And I would just spend the day, driving in my car with a list of phone numbers and just call the running stores of the city I was going to. And I just made my way to essentially from Utah up north through Michigan and Ohio and all that and then we ended up at the Boston Marathon. And that's where we showcased the product for the very first time to the public.
That's where I met you the first time.
Yep, was Boston Marathon, April of 2011, and then I continued around and drove down the East Coast and drove back through Texas, and then did another loop later, through California, and I just started kind of as the sales guy. We had Jeremy was doing marketing, Golden was doing product design and development, and we hired a couple people for some customer service and operations. Seth Wold was our first employee, who was a stud, and just carried on and started hiring. And we had someone with our parent company that kind of oversaw that and helped with the transition. And after a couple of years of being the sales guy, I'd built up a sales team and a sales force, and ended up the Jim, who was our super stud. He was an NFL defensive end, and he's a total cool guy. He was kind of the leader and kind of oversaw it a little bit, and then he kind of moved on, and I ended up becoming the president of Altra, and just was able to oversee for the next 6 years the massive growth of Altra, and have been involved in all of that. And it was a wild experience. I had no knowledge of setting up businesses, but we made it work. We set up warehouses in Europe and in the US and did operations. So all of us did a bit of everything, right? I mean, yeah, we kind of had our scope of responsibilities, but it was particularly in those early years, even with the parent company, we were scrappy. We were, they never let us, we didn't go into debt. They were like, look, we'll just let you grow yourself, and we'll provide kind of the back end functions and some support, but we're not going to dump a ton of money in it. You guys have to do it yourself. And so even though we did have that early parent company, which was great to get us off the floor, we still were that entrepreneurial, scrappy brand. You just find a way to make it work. I don't care if you have experience, and make it happen, make it work.
That's the one thing that I'm super curious about. People who don't have business degrees or an MBA or anything, who get put in this spot, who end up doing it more by instinct and doing it more by being aware of what you don't know and trying to find the people who can help you, like being honest enough to know, I have no experience with this. Who can help me? Who does have experience that can help guide me through it? And it sounds like that's a lot what you went through. Were any of the three of you on the business track? It sounds like Jeremy was the one that kind of saw it should be a business.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he was definitely more marketing background, right? And Gold and I we just worked retail. So, our business experience was a little retail, from a run specialty account. I ended up at a ski and outdoor shop for a couple of years. I think, and this is, I just read a book recently kind of about this. It really hit home, and it's called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it's kind of about like the way the education system works. It's all about just memorization. And it basically is like, we got to learn critical thinking. And my dad, the chemical engineer, scientist. And so I feel like I had a little bit better than most kind of a critical thinking mind. And maybe that's my personality, and maybe that's my dad and so forth. But, when you have critical thinking skills rather than just pure memorization skills, you can apply that to anything.
Amen.
If you are scrappy and you have critical thinking skills, you can learn it. That to me is having critical thinking ability and skills is so much more important than an SAT score or a business degree or any of that other shit, right?
My daughter would be laughing. The conversation you're having right now is the conversation I've had with my kids so many times when they get upset about a test score. I'm like, look, your ability to memorize something is not indicative of your ability to succeed. Your ability to communicate, your ability to interact with people, your ability to lead, those are the traits. It's the old EQ versus IQ. What's your IQ is your ability to memorize and your ability to do math and things like that. But your emotional intelligence, your EQ, your ability to connect with people, your ability to sell, your ability to share your vision, get people to follow you and believe that the passion you have for something has something, even if they don't get it, they're drawn to it. And boy, tell me more about that book. I'm really intrigued now. What are some of the lies that tell me some of the lies. What do you break
Well,
down?
the guy who wrote it is a college history professor, so it definitely focuses more on like U.S. history
Ah,
and the way it's presented and the way we teach and I think college does such a better job of this, right, than elementary and middle school and high school and um, you know it's just a great book. It's not a super techy. It's definitely more. It's probably made for like a high school or college kid. But I breeze through it on Audible. I read a lot of books. I just crush them on Audible. And it was just fascinating. He's like, look, history isn't black and white. In terms of facts, right? History is mucky. It's
it's
ugly,
nuanced.
and it's nuanced. And he takes it from a history perspective that you know we our history books are written from and this is even more pertinent today, and he wrote this in the early 90s and he's now in the third edition, but he talks about how it's white male written, and it doesn't highlight the genocide that we committed. It doesn't emphasize the slavery. It glosses over that. It makes everything. And I think America loves heroes. We heroify everything, and then we go to Europe, like, these people are kind of bitter, and they're not as down. It's like, well, they're probably a little more realist, right? We
Yeah,
build these
yeah.
things up, and we need to realize that Abraham Lincoln had some really bigoted comments, but at the same time he had a bigger vision that, hey, slavery is, and push for that. But we have to learn that, yeah, how many high school kids know that Thomas Jefferson had children with his slaves? He's like, that's fact.
Yeah,
Like, we
yeah,
know this. Like, we
yeah,
know that he had children with his slaves, and most kids don't even know he had slaves, let alone,
yeah.
and they need to learn that hey, history is nuanced. That Thomas Jefferson was an amazing person, an amazing president, a
Well,
visionary, but he was human, and he made mistakes, and he did not free his slaves when he died. He freed a couple of his children, but we need to learn this as kids, that science isn't fact. Coronavirus, yeah, science doesn't have all the answers, right? It's about hypothesis, theory, and then fact, and how that is nuanced. And if we can understand those nuances, that
mm,
things are gray, and critical thinking, then you can figure it out, whether it's history, whether it's math, whether it's business, whether it's science and biomechanics and running shoes. You can figure it out if you have those critical thinking skills and understand some of those nuances. And then ultimately, you just dive in head first and give it everything you have. And I really believe that you can be successful if you put your mind to it. Education is important, but it doesn't mean your grades are necessarily important. But I believe education is very, very, very important. And I think
I do too.
some of our education systems, particularly in the early years here in the U.S., are frankly just archaic.
Yeah. Have you ever read The Millionaire Mind?
Oh, I haven't, but
So
it sounds up my alley.
it is. It talks a lot about what you're talking about right now. It was a study of a very large number of entrepreneurs, I think like 1,000, and looking at what sort of correlation their education had, or what sort of correlation traditional education had with success, or the chances of you becoming a millionaire. And it uncovered something very different than what it set out to do, because what it discovered that is there are more millionaires that don't have a formal education, and who have that EQ that we were just talking about, who can understand that nuance and understand people. But when you actually take a look and study the people who are millionaires, you find there's a lot more scrappy, hardworking, quick moving, outside the box people that see the friction in the market and turn those opportunities into businesses. And there's actually more data, when you get told that, like, get good grades, get a good job, retire with a pension, that's the path to success, save money for the future. When you really study the people who are successful, you find it's actually not the majority, it's actually the minority. And that's not what they teach you in school.
Right. And I just think it's important for people to realize that my IQ is not that great. You meet me in person, I'm a pretty average Joe. It's not like not like any of us are that intelligent. It's just, we worked hard. We were smart enough. We had the IQ, just enough IQ and EQ, and you can make it work. I mean, right now, I'm 38 years old, and I definitely don't have the millions. That didn't work out with some of the deals that we made in order to just keep our company afloat. But at the same time, I've got a great lifestyle. I stepped down as president partly for that exact reason. I just said, I'm exhausted. I'm not a business guy in terms of my attitude. I can do it, but we got acquired in 2018, which is by another company, which is really cool. I'm really happy about this new acquisition. And I was able to step down, and I now work remote. I would not have had time to do as many of these podcasts and so forth. But one of my new roles is like, look, Brian, we can hire people to do those business reports and the inventory forecasting and the HR that I was having to deal with. What we can't hire is someone to go out and tell your story.
Yeah.
And so now that's when you said, hey, can you come on my podcast? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what I do now, because I don't have to do any of that business stuff. Even though I learned it, it was great. I actually was very good at it. But, we can hire people to do that. And I think as businesses grow, you have to understand how to evolve and how to grow. And I think Altra's done a really, really good job of that. That if you look at our verbiage today, we talk less about zero drop, because that has become very associated with barefoot and minimalism. And also it is kind of a double negative for people who've never heard of it. And so now we've rephrased that. We're using a lot more in our marketing and our terminology as balanced cushioning.
That's good. That's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it totally is accurate. And so people are like, oh, you're moving away from zero drop. No, we have stuck to our guns. Our foot shape, we've kind of made it look a little slimmer, and a couple of the models aren't quite as roomy as that original Instinct. But if you try on a Lone Peak right now and you try on the original Lone Peak, they don't feel that much different, right? And so, we definitely have a little bit more cushion than we used to, but at the same time, our foot shape, our balance cushion, and our gender specific, they're the exact same as they were 9 years ago. They have not changed. And we changed some of the verbiage. We've evolved as a company. I don't have to do the business reports and inventory forecasts I used to. I get to come on podcasts and chat with cool people like you instead of having to deal with all that crap.
So let me ask you about that. Let me ask you a little bit about life balance, because this is something that I started my business because it sounds insane now. One of the main initiatives of starting my business is I didn't want to work so much. I was working for my dad, and my family has a chain of auto parts stores that my grandfather started, and it's a big company. And when I got married, I got thrown out of college. I'm not that bright. I can't do tests. It's just not me. I'm an outdoors kid. I was a BMX kid. All I want to do is be outside. So I went and worked for my dad, and I find myself working 80 hours a week.
Yep.
Phenomenally depressed, unable, I'm not exercising. I'm gaining weight. My head is turned to mush. I'm completely stressed. And when I left my family business to start my own business, one of the main initiatives was to find a better life balance. I knew I had to be outside, and I had to figure out a way to support that. And working for a traditional job would not allow that. And so it meant as I grew the business, I didn't make as much money as I could have if it was all my sweat equity. I hired people as soon as I could, who could do the things that I hired people that were better than me at things.
Yep, 100%.
Early, because number one, they were better than me. And number two, I always considered it an investment. I didn't wait till I had enough money to hire them. I hired them because they would help create the money. And then back to the lifestyle, I didn't want to work that much. Now, looking back at it, when you own a business, no matter how much you're physically there or not, you work 24/7. You never stop thinking. But
you dream it.
But it becomes your job.
24/7.
You do. So you're an outdoorsman. I'm an outdoorsman. We both have this thing we know we have to make money, but the reason why we make money is so we can be outside doing the things we love. So there's some things I want to find out. I want to talk about that life balance a little bit about how stressful did it get before you pulled back? Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm totally open and transparent about that. I was doing ultras all throughout that early years. I did Ultra Trail Mount Fuji in 2000, and not obviously I did a ton of local ones, and I was fairly competitive ish. Not elite, but locally I'd show up and place top 10 at most
Those
ultras locally.
100-mile races, just so people don't know, when you say an ultra, well, 50 and 100-mile, well, 50K, 50-mile, and hundreds are sort of the staples. Were you doing an
Yeah.
assortment?
I was doing all of the above. I would usually do one, maybe 200 milers a year, and then I'd do several 50Ks and several 50 milers. So I was doing, anywhere from 6 to 8 ultra marathons in a year, and I'd usually throw in a couple road marathons. I do my Boston double every year.
Yeah.
And I did New York one year in Paris and a couple local ones here in Utah, road marathons. But virtually all my training, most of my races, most of all that was my ultra trail. And I do mountain stuff. I'm a mountain guy. I live in Utah. I love the mountains. And so my 100 milers are a little different than some of the flatter or some of the rail trail, or definitely some of like the loop courses. I like big mountains. And so that was kind of my focus. And, I did Mont Blanc in 2015. And then I got into hard rock in 2016. And I started feeling some fatigue and starting to little depression setting in 2016 because, I now had 3 kids at that point. I just had my 3rd kid. And I was running this company. We were growing crazy amounts, and I'm trying to do ultra marathons and trying to be a good dad and trying to be the president of a company that's now doing, lots and lots of tens of millions of dollars and hiring and growth. And it really started getting to me in 2016. And by the time 2018 came around, I was a wreck. I really was. I wasn't running that much. I was trying to run, but I was struggling. I started fly fishing more just because that was less exercise and more calming. And so I've kind of shifted some of my running hobby, which became more and more exertion. And also you're just thinking about shoes and running the whole time. Yeah. My whole life was running, and I found fly fishing to be more of an outlet where I was focused on the fishing. I wasn't thinking about ultra. The only time of the day or week that I was not thinking about ultra was when I was fishing. And so I've kind of shifted a lot of my time and energy to fly fishing, which I find unbelievably relaxing. But 2018 was probably the hardest year of my life. I was on my way to becoming an alcoholic. I was definitely substance abuse, and I was stressed. My home life wasn't great. The work and it was really hard, and I'm pretty open about it. We don't need to hide that we have struggle years, or that everyone has problems. Like I said, we don't need to heroify me or Abraham Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson, right? Going back to that. We can be open and transparent that we have weaknesses and we have problems. And 2018 was a really hard year for me. And we got acquired that year. And so the acquisition is really stressful for a leader like that. And I was kind of holding on by a thread. And I just talked to the new parent company and just said, I was kind of on this, I thought I might be interested in kind of this corporate hierarchy as I was growing, and I was being very successful, my reputation, my work ethic, and my smart, and just enough brains and scrappiness to make this work. And I got to the point where I was like, it's just not worth it. It's not me. I'm an outdoors guy. I'm not an 80-hour-a-week office, look at a TV screen. I'm just not that guy. And I thought I could try to become that guy. And it just made me depressed, and I was stressed. And I luckily was able to work with the new parent company, that BF. They own Vans, they own North Face, they own Smartwool, they own Timberland. This is a big
great
deal.
Brands.
They bought us. They're great. They're really people first. And they basically said, yeah, Brian, let's work this out. We can find people to do that stuff. Let's get you out to do your story. And so now, that was about 18 months ago, and in I guess July of 2019 was kind of when I officially, and I'd kind of already transitioned out of that role for the previous 6 months. So 2019 was kind of a rebuilding year. We moved, my wife and I and our 3 kids moved to just outside of Park City, Utah. So I live big mountains right up my front door. And I don't run competitively anymore. I usually do about, 5 to 6 mile runs.
That's where I'm at right now too.
And I fly fish pretty much, usually I've got a blue ribbon trout stream 5 minutes from my house, and I usually go out and, do some bigger rivers farther away every Sunday. It's kind of my fly fishing day, and I run and fish. And I drop my kids off at school every morning, and I work remote, and it has been, I'm about the happiest I've been since really the initial years of Altra were so exciting. I mean, 2010, 2011, 2012 were so exciting and fun, but I think that there's an element of adrenal fatigue that took place as well when you're thresholding it. I was a competitive ultra runner. I mean, you're just almost kind of like adrenal fatigue is almost kind of what I describe
ran
it
into
as.
that too.
And so now I'm all about balance. I am in Wasatch 100 next year. I was going to do it this year.
Awesome.
And kind of as my 10-year anniversary of that moment that I was telling you about. It's now, they canceled the race because of COVID. So it's going to be the 11-year anniversary run. So I'm going to build up and run a 100-miler, which I'm confident I can finish and do. I still need to get Western States checked off the list. And I've got enough points in there that I think I should be able to get it in the next several years. But
good luck.
I don't know how many more ultras I'm going to do, frankly. Until the real passion comes back, I'll do a couple here and there just to have some fun. And I'll probably be, instead of the, 95th percentile, I'll probably be more in like the, 30th percentile, more mid to back of the pack. And that's totally cool. Yep. And it doesn't matter. And, life's good. And my relationship with my kids have never, ever been better. I've got time for that. I work home. I still work hard. I still stay very busy. I have a lot more time to do research now. I'm not reacting to stuff like I used to be, and I'm being able to do my research and be a little more proactive. And I'm able to come out and just tell Altra's story, but also my story, in terms of my personal struggles and things like this. And I'm super open about talking that I've struggled with depression most of my adult life. You just have to find a balance, and you just have to work through it, and everyone's different. And I feel like, particularly these last several years, I've worked really hard to find that balance, to achieve that balance, and still maintain my integrity and my passion for Altra, which is, I consider it my brand, right? Like it's very, very personal company to me. And I get to sit back now and watch it a little bit more and just really appreciate what we did and then what we're continuing to do. Because if you think Ultra's big right now, you just wait 5 years.
Nice.
We've got big plans. We think that we barely scratched the surface of who we can get into our shoes. And I think that that's really the goal, right? Is I want people to have that healthy experience that I had and that other people have had around me. And we want more people in our shoes. Obviously, the revenue, the money's great, but at the same time, we started this to help people to run better, to run with less injuries. And that's what it's all about. And I love hearing stories about how these changed my life, or I ran faster, or I ran healthier, or my feet have never felt better. I love hearing those stories to this day because that's why I did it. That's what I care about.
And that's how you build a good business. That's what keeps, when your business stands for something other than making money, your business does something that can carry you through every different change, because at the core, that kernel of why you exist is still there, and that's the motivating factor. Everything else can change. The materials you use for the shoes, the marketing you do, all that stuff can change. But ultimately, if you're still delivering that experience that is why you created it in the first place, then it will continue to flourish. I mean, that's awesome. So
yep.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about, because I think your path as a sort of involuntary business owner, business leader, and the things that come with it, trying to figure out that balance and trying to keep your sanity and keep your family together, keep your relationships together. There's a lot of different things that you can do to relieve some of that stress. And of course, both you and I know probably number one is exercise. It's probably the best thing you can do for your mental health. Whenever somebody tells me that they're on SSRIs or they're contemplating moving that way, the first thing is, have you tried exercising regularly first? Because that's probably the best antidepressant out there. But for people like you and I, who I don't know about you, but I was training 15, 20 hours a week, getting up at 4 in the morning to get my 20-mile run done before I went into work at 9 o'clock and then deal with that stress, that can get out of balance. So now exercise isn't really helping that mental. There are other things I had to turn to, primarily meditation and a lot of reading books on trying to deal with this stuff. But what else did you turn to outside of just realizing that your day-to-day schedule wasn't working or was contributing to this the buildup?
Yeah, I think for me it was just some of the little things, where I wasn't as sharp at work.
You're making decisions
Just
reactively. You said that early, and I
yeah,
want you can't think from a clear place when you're just
correct.
when your cortisol levels are up to here, and you're full of stress hormone, and any little thing becomes gigantic. You can't look at big picture anymore.
Yep. And luckily, my staff around me was awesome. I had such good employees. Like you said, you build out a team around you, and they supported me. But the couple of them, they could sense, and they were open. I'm a really open guy, and they knew I was struggling, and they stepped up and helped a little bit more, and I had to rely on some of them a bit more and delegate a bit better, and just I was I just you just find that you're just not the same person. And I think that was what's scary is I just didn't quite even recognize myself as much. I was still the same person, but I just wasn't as happy. I wasn't as sharp. I would get home and just have to start drinking a little bit, and it just wasn't healthy lifestyle. My running, my motivation to run, I was exhausted. It was painful. It was a chore to run.
I can
And I think
sympathize.
that there's always that balance, right? And you get on those depression meds and all that. And I no anxiety meds, no sleeping pills, prescription sleeping pills, no depression meds. I was on all that. And as I'm starting to take that, and then you start taking more because it doesn't work as well.
Yeah,
And you're just kind of turned numb. And it's just like, I'm exercising less. I'm taking more meds. I'm stressed. My relationships aren't great. I'm definitely drank a little too much last night. Just those type of things start adding up. And it was just like, you know what? I don't need to run 12 miles today
yeah.
to feel better. I can go out for 35, 40 minutes and get more benefit than from going out for 2.5 hours. And you start realizing that, and you start, relationships aren't as good. And I'm glad you mentioned meditation, because I went from reading books like, and great books, awesome books, right? Better, Faster, Smarter, Start with Why,
Yeah.
Steve Jobs, these awesome books about business and entrepreneurship. And I kind of shifted there over to, I guess you'd call them self-help books, but, things more on that category. A lot of meditation. I've definitely got into, I meditate every single morning. I get up, I meditate. Winter is a little easier for me for whatever reason, because it's not as light, and I'm able to get up at 6:30, and I spend 30 minutes meditating in front of our little fire at our house. And my
Perfect.
kids meet me. Their alarms are 7 a.m. We say, hey, stay in your room till 7. And they come up and meet me at the fireplace every day at 7 o'clock. And I just spent 30 minutes meditating. And my kids, before it was like you'd see them for 5 minutes and say hi and tell them you love them and kiss them, but you weren't actually able to get to know them, and they weren't able to get to know you. And now I spend 30 minutes every morning before breakfast at 7:30 just hanging out with my kids. And sometimes we just sit there and watch the fire. We talk about life. A lot of times they have questions. We pull out books. We got a huge bookshelf. We pull out books and flip through atlases, and they love animals and stuff like that. And it's just so, life is so much better just by putting in, a little, going to bed a little earlier, getting up and meditating for 30 minutes rather than getting up at 4 in the morning and running 30 miles, however many miles, right? 13 miles or whatever, right? Some of those little things that just kind of add up, and life is simpler, which I think is a big key to that, right? Just minimalism, right? Less shoe is better, less stuff. I don't need stuff. I don't need any more stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't need it. I don't need more, right, in life. I need less in life. And the less I have in life, the happier I am, the more content I am. And my balance in life is just, it's so much better than it was 3 years ago. I can't even compare it.
I'm glad to hear that. It's
My ego, I don't have that, like, oh, I'm the president of Ultra and rah rah rah, but there's definitely kind of a humility that needs to take place there, and that was tough to swallow. But at the same time, now it doesn't matter. It's all freaking ego. Who cares?
you know what
I did, and I'm happy. I'm content. I make good money. I never made the big buyout bucks due to some contractual things, which is fine. but I have a comfortable life. I've got freedom. I fly fish, I run, I hang out with my kids, I work hard, but it's just so much better balance.
Yeah. I think when you're building a business, and I think sometimes if you're not building a business, and it's hard to understand that as things go well, what happens is you start to get, well, I'll speak for myself, but I think this is a pretty universal pattern, is you start to get very fearful. And this is where all the stress comes from, is like, okay, so we're 3 years in and things are going right. And you start to become afraid that this snowball that's growing will start shrinking, or something will wreck it, or, and then you get into that place that we were talking about, where you become incredibly reactive, because from people on the outside, they see, oh, you're so successful, you're doing so well, your business is growing so good. But what they don't know is that the weight on your shoulders is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And the fear of losing this success gets bigger and bigger and bigger, until all of a sudden you don't even know where you are anymore. You're just completely full of fear that you're not going to continue to be successful. And I think when you get past that, when you go, look, if it all goes away, I'm all right. If you can get to that point where you go, this is a terrible thing to say, because if you don't have money, this sounds so disingenuous and shitty, but once you have enough money to realize it's not about the money. It's not, and having money creates a massive amount of, if you don't get outside that loop, and that's why so many rich people are so miserable, is because they're so afraid of losing the money. But you can get hit by a bus tomorrow, and that money doesn't mean shit. The relationship with your family and all those things that you're putting aside because of this fear of losing your money. And it becomes a very vicious circle that happens very slowly, very insidiously. It's not like one day your life changes, and you don't know you're in that loop until you get up in the morning and your heart rate's 120 and you can't focus and you don't know what is wrong with me. And what a great problem to have. But if you don't get out on the other side, it's a hell of a lesson to be able to learn. I'm really grateful that I was able to go through that path, and I'm still trying to not let that stress, but it's easy to see how it happens if you've gone through it before. And not a lot of people break out of it.
Yeah, I agree. It becomes a drug, right?
Yes.
Success is a drug,
yes.
right? Money can be a drug.
Your self-worth gets wrapped up in it.
You know what? I think the number is something around, like, if you're in America, and again, every standard of living is different, right? But I mean, if you're in America, your happiness level will increase until your salary is about $70,000. And after $70,000, there is zero increase in happiness levels over 70 grand a year. Zero. Like, there is no core. I mean, you can do all the research, it's out there, you can read it, and so once you get that threshold, and I think part of the reason there's that fearful and there's that drive to be successful and to go and to push is, if you really think about how lucky I got in making Altra successful, and I call it luck. I've come to realize more and more that it's less about my intelligence or my hard work as much as it is about, we just got lucky. We had the right idea at the right. If we'd come out 2 years earlier or 2 years later, we probably wouldn't have made it. Like, we just came in that perfect time and we got lucky. And you start looking at businesses, and now that I've started and run and now watching grow a successful business, you realize how hard business is.
It is.
Businesses, there's a reason. I mean, the statistic, it all changes, but it's 90+% of businesses, they go out of business. They don't last more than a couple of years. And that's because it's hard. And I think that you learn a lot of respect for businesses that just make it, because business is hard. But at the same time, business is a necessity in terms of making things go, but it's not the end all. Like, it's not the end result. It's a process. Business is a process, not the end result. And when you start realizing that the end result is about your own sanity and about your relationships and about just your quality of life, Altra, even at this point, obviously at this point, Altra's kind of made my career, and I can go out and I got resumes and whatnot. But ultimately, Altra doesn't define me like I would have considered it defined me years ago. It's just a part of me. It's part of my life, and it's great. I love it. But at the same time, it's not number one. Like, and maybe, part of me thinks it had to be number one for it to be successful. I had to put in those 80-hour weeks. And again, like you said, it's hard to pull back from that. It sounds like you did successfully, which is awesome. I know that I've done it successfully, which is awesome. And I encourage people that, you have to be able to put in those 80-hour weeks, and you have to be able to sacrifice. You have to put in those risks, but don't let that become a drug.
Yeah, and it ties back to what we said earlier, that if your business serves a purpose other than just making money, that's where the joy comes from. And if it only is about making money, you will get to this point and it will implode. The business won't work, you won't work, nothing will work. You've got to get to that point where the work you're doing is because you feel it adds value to others and not just money into your bank account.
Yep. Yep. So, life's good. 2020, I know it's been tough on a lot of people. It's created a lot of introspection for me. I travel a lot. I always have. It used to be sales. Now it's more, events, promotion, speaking engagements, things like that. But not traveling's been kind of a blessing for me, because it was a good time for me personally, because I've been building up back with my kids, and I spend hours a day with my kids now, where before it used to be minutes, right? And so 2020 has kind of been a blessing in disguise for me, just because I'm lucky because I've got stable work, but at the same time, it's all about those silver linings, finding the positives in everything. And I've been able to spend a lot of time with my kids, and they know me so much better, and my relationship's good, amazing right there. You just have to find the positives, make it work, and find the balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. It's funny. It's very hard to talk about COVID and business, because you can't talk about COVID without being a bit somber, and about realizing that there are so many people that have lost loved ones, that for those people, there's no silver lining at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're spending more time with our families. The outdoor industries are exploding because people are reprioritizing. They're coming to the same conclusions that we just talked about, where maybe I shouldn't be working so much. This is amazing. I get to spend time with my kids, and I get to see my wife more, my husband more. And you're putting stock into doing the things that you can do during COVID, and that's physical. And again, that's good for your mental health. So there's some silver linings in people realigning the things that are important to them, as long as you can still make ends meet and your industry hasn't been wiped out. If you're in the entertainment or restaurant business, you're not going to find any silver linings right now.
Well,
but
yeah.
For this country,
I think, it's tough because you have to be great. Sorry. You have to be grateful for what you have. And I'm very grateful for 2020 that I'm in a place. And again, like you said, sombering, because so many people aren't in my situation, and I feel so much for them. But at the same time, I need to be grateful for what I have, and finding those positives, and really feeling blessed myself. And, but it is sombering and it's hard. And you were saying about the U.S.?
Well, I just saying, we have a health crisis in COVID.
Yeah.
But at the same time, on the other side, there is a health benefit that is happening for the people that don't get sick and their families. And I think it'll take a while before that all shakes out. Maybe once a vaccine gets more widely, becomes distributed, and we can focus on that, and people go, maybe I don't want to go back working home. And now that my company allows me to work remotely, I kind of like it this way. So maybe there'll be some long-term benefits out of this change in way of looking at life.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. And I know that the national forests and Yellowstone and all that, they're hitting record numbers. The virus doesn't spread outdoors very easily. And so finding ways to get outside and go for a walk, exercise doesn't need to be a lactic threshold for 60 minutes of just go, right? You can go for a walk, get fresh air. You don't need that huge vacation. You can go camping and have amazing experiences. So, hopefully a few good things come out of the COVID pandemic, which has been a rough year for a lot of people. But, I think that in the past, I've seen a lot of these things as threats in the past. And now, through meditation and through a lot of self-analysis and a lot of books and things like that, It's been a big effort of mine these last couple years to just be grateful and find positivity and really try to focus on that more and more in life. And it's paid dividends for my just general fulfillment in life.
Yeah. Cool. Well, man, it sounds like you're in a good place. I'm psyched for you. And I've been thinking about doing 100 again. Man, maybe we'll get a chance to run together because, boy, I think you and I could talk for a long time.
We could.
Yeah.
We could go and do a 50 miler together and just talk for 10 straight hours, couldn't we?
Yeah, well, it might be a way to get around the pain that's involved. Well,
Yeah.
hey, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this. It was great talking to you. I really appreciate it. And I think people are going to love this conversation. It's nice to hear your perspective on what it really takes to build a big business.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and let's stay in better touch these next few years.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Okay, see you, dude.